I picked it up and walked out. The door closed behind me, and I stood in the parking lot of the reception hall holding a manila envelope against my chest, listening to the music still playing inside. And I thought, okay, this is what it is. My brother's rehearsal dinner was still going on without me. I'll back up. My name is Laurel. I'm 29 years old. I'm an accountant. Not the exciting kind, not the kind that goes on TV and talks about forensic finance. I sit in a cubicle in Portland, Oregon, and I reconcile spreadsheets for a mid-sized logistics company. I am exceptionally good at it. I have been exceptionally good at quietly doing things that matter and watching other people take the credit for most of my adult life. My brother's name is Derek. He's 26. He's getting married to a woman named Paige, who I actually like. I want to be clear about that. Paige is kind. Paige remembered my birthday last year without being prompted. Whatever happened at that rehearsal dinner, it was not Paige's fault. Derek and I grew up in a town outside of Columbus, Ohio. Our parents, I'll just call them Mom and Dad, were not wealthy, but they were not poor either. They were the kind of middle-income Midwest family that owned a house on a cul-de-sac, took one vacation a year, and talked constantly about appearances. About what the neighbors thought. About which cousin had done well and which one had embarrassed the family at Thanksgiving. Derek was always the one who had done well. He was charming. He played lacrosse. He had the kind of easy confidence that makes people in rooms turn toward you like plants toward a window. I was the older sister who got good grades and didn't cause problems and was described at every family dinner as so responsible in the tone of voice people use when they mean boring. I left for college in Portland on a partial scholarship and a lot of student loans, and I did not come back except for holidays. I built my life there slowly and with difficulty and with no help from anyone. I know that sounds bitter. I'm not bitter about it anymore. I made my choices. I'm just telling you the facts. What I haven't told anyone. What I haven't told my parents. What I haven't told Derek. What I have told exactly 0 people is that for the past 4 years, I have been paying Derek's student loans. Not all of them. He took out $67,000 for a business degree at Ohio State. After he graduated, he was making decent money at a sales job, but the payment schedule was brutal, $890 a month. And I found out through my mother, who mentioned it in that casual way she mentions things she wants you to fix, that Derek was drowning, that he and Paige were fighting about money, that they couldn't afford to move out of his apartment into something bigger before the wedding. My mother told me this in November 2 years ago, on a Tuesday night phone call that lasted 45 minutes and covered several topics including my failure to attend my cousin's baby shower and whether I was dating anyone. She did not ask me to help. She just told me, and then she moved on. I sat with it for 3 days. Then I called Derek's loan servicer, explained I was a family member who wanted to set up third-party payments, and gave them my routing number. I set up automatic transfers, $890 a month, for $48.90 a month, for 48 months, which works out to $42,720. I didn't tell anyone. I want to explain this, because I know how it sounds. I know people will say it was foolish. I know people will say I was setting myself up, but I want you to understand the math of our family. If I had called my mother and said, I want to help Derek with his loans, she would have thanked me and then told Derek I offered. Derek would have accepted probably, but it would have created this complicated dynamic where I was the big sister helping the little brother, and Derek would have felt indebted, and my mother would have used it as leverage in 17 future conversations. I had watched this happen with money in our family before. It never ended cleanly. I also, if I'm honest, and I'm trying to be, I wanted to know if they actually liked having me in their lives, or if they would notice, or if, without the transaction of it, without knowing there was something to be grateful for, they would treat me the same. They did not treat me the same. But not in the way I was hoping. Over those 4 years, things got better for Derek. The loan payments disappearing from his budget meant he and Paige could actually save. They moved into a nice 2-bedroom place in Dublin, Ohio. They got a dog, they got engaged. They started planning a wedding that was, by all accounts, fairly elaborate for a young couple in their mid-20s with regular jobs. My mother was delighted. She called me every few weeks to give me updates. The venue, the flowers, the guest list, the dress. I listened and I said that sounds wonderful and I meant it. I was genuinely happy for Derek. I liked Paige. I wanted them to have a good life. What I did not realize, what I should have asked directly instead of assuming, was that my position in the wedding had been quietly renegotiated without my knowledge. I found out in March. 3 months before the wedding, my mother called on a Sunday morning, which she never does, and after about 4 minutes of set-up conversation, she said, "I wanted to let you know, honey, before you make any plans. Derek and Paige decided to keep the wedding party really small, just close friends, so you won't need to buy a bridesmaid dress or anything." I said, "I'm not in the wedding party," she said. "They wanted to keep it intimate." I said, "I'm his sister." She said, "I know, sweetheart. But Paige has 4 close friends who've known her since childhood, and Derek wanted balance. It's not personal. I want to tell you that I handled that gracefully." I didn't. I cried after I hung up the phone. I sat on my kitchen floor for a while and cried, which I am somewhat embarrassed to admit, but there it is. I was 32 years old, sitting on a kitchen floor in Portland crying because my brother didn't want me in his wedding. Then I got up, washed my face, and thought, fine. I'll be a guest. That's fine. I'll wear a nice dress, and I'll sit in the pew, and I'll be happy for them. And that is completely fine. I flew to Columbus in June. I had booked my flights in March, right after that phone call, round trip, Portland to Columbus, $440. I got the cheapest option because I was already doing the math in the back of my head, the way I always do, the way accountants can't help doing. The rehearsal dinner was on a Friday night. I had been told by my mother in a text that it was at a restaurant called Hartwell's in the Short North neighborhood, 7 o'clock. Smart casual. I showed up at 7:15. I was wearing a green dress I'd bought for the occasion. I had a card in my purse with a heartfelt note inside and a check for $300. Because what do you give the groom at a rehearsal dinner when you're his sister and you've been paying his debt for 4 years, and he doesn't know it? The hostess took me back to the private room. I opened the door. The room was full. The whole wedding party. Both sets of parents. Aunts and uncles I recognized. Paige's college friends laughing at something. Candles on every table. Derek at the head, standing up, mid-toast. He saw me. He stopped. My mother turned around. Her face did something complicated that I don't have a clean word for. Derek set his glass down and came over, and he pulled me just slightly outside the door. Not dramatically. Not a scene. Just a few steps into the hallway, and he said, quietly, "Laurel, what are you doing here?" I said, "Mom texted me. Hartwell's, 7 o'clock. He looked genuinely confused. He said, "This is a dinner for the wedding party and immediate family who are in the party. We're doing a separate thing Saturday before the ceremony. That's the family brunch. That's what you were invited to." I stared at him. He said, "I thought Mom explained." I said, "She didn't." There was a pause. In the background, I could hear someone laughing, a glass clinking. Derek said, "I'm sorry, there's really no room at the tables. We planned the seating exactly. It would be really awkward to." I said, "It's fine." He said, "You're not mad?" I said, "I'm fine, Derek. Go finish your toast." I went back through the lobby. I smiled at the hostess because I don't know why, habit I guess, and I walked outside into the June heat, and I stood next to a concrete planter full of petunias, and I stood there for a while. I had flown across the country. I was wearing a green dress. I was carrying a card with a heartfelt note and a check for $300. I had been paying his debt, quietly, for 4 years, $890 a month, and I was standing outside a rehearsal dinner I had not been invited to because my mother had sent me the wrong information and my brother had not thought to confirm. I didn't cry this time. I was past crying. I was in some other place, quieter than crying. I called a car. I went back to my parents' house where I was staying. My parents were at the dinner. The house was empty. I sat in my old bedroom, which now had a treadmill in it, and I looked at the walls where my high school debate trophies used to be, and I thought about the envelope in my purse, the envelope I had brought to give Derek as a wedding gift. Inside that envelope was a letter. The letter explained everything: the loan servicer, the payment history, the 4 years, the $42,720. I had printed out the payment records. I had highlighted the routing number, my routing number, so there was no question. I had intended to give it to him at the family brunch on Saturday as a gift, this was my real wedding present moment. I had imagined it going a certain way. I had imagined him reading it and being stunned and saying something that would make the last 4 years feel worth it. I sat on the treadmill in my childhood bedroom, and I looked at the envelope and I made a decision. I put the envelope back in my purse. I booked a flight home for Saturday morning. I left before the brunch. I texted my mother. Something came up at work, had to catch an early flight, congratulate them for me. I texted Derek. Sorry I missed the brunch, I'll call you soon. I texted Paige. You're going to be a beautiful bride. So happy for you both. I flew home to Portland. I went back to my apartment. I fed my cat. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, and I thought, very carefully, about what I wanted to do next. Here's the thing about being an accountant. You understand that numbers are not neutral. Numbers are records. A payment made on a specific date from a specific account is not an opinion or a feeling. It's a documented fact. And documented facts have a way of surfacing eventually, whether you intend them to or not. I didn't do anything dramatic. I want to be clear about that. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything. I didn't send the envelope. I just called the loan servicer on Monday morning and told them I needed to discontinue the third-party payments. The woman on the phone said, "Just to confirm, these payments have been covering the account in full. Discontinuing them will cause the account to become delinquent within 30 days. I said, "I understand." She said, "Is there anything else I can help you with?" I said, "No, thank you." I hung up and I went to work and I reconciled spreadsheets for 8 hours and I went home and I watched television and I went to sleep. 31 days later, my mother called me. She did not lead with pleasantries. She said, "Derek got a notice that his student loans are past due." He called the servicer and they told him the third-party payments stopped. Laurel. A pause. "It was you, wasn't it?" It wasn't a question. I said yes. Silence. My mother said, "For how long?" I said, 4 years. I could hear her breathing. She said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I said, "I don't know, Mom." "Why didn't you tell me about the rehearsal dinner?" That was maybe unfair. I know it was maybe unfair. But I had been sitting with it for 5 weeks and it came out before I could decide whether I meant to say it. My mother said, "That was a miscommunication. Derek thought I had told you, I thought he had." I said, "I know. I believe you. I know it was a miscommunication." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, $42,000. I said, "Yes." She said, "Laurel." I said, "I have to go, Mom." I hung up. Derek called an hour later. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let that go to voicemail. He called again. I let that go too. The third call I picked up. He said, "Is it true?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because you needed it and I could and I didn't want it to be complicated." He said, "Not telling me made it more complicated." I said, "I know that now." There was a long pause. I could hear traffic through his phone. He was outside somewhere. He said, "Are you angry at me? About the rehearsal dinner?" I said, "It was a miscommunication." He said, "Laurel." I said, "I'm not angry. I'm tired. There's a difference." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't know you were doing that. If I had known." I said, "What would you have done differently?" He was quiet. I said, "That's the thing, Derek. I genuinely don't know the answer to that question. And for a long time I told myself it didn't matter. But it matters to me now. I need to know that you actually want me around. Not because I'm useful. Because I'm your sister, he said. You are my sister. I said, I know that biologically. I want to know it in the other way. He didn't have a clean answer for that. I didn't expect him to. Some things don't have clean answers right away. We talked for a while longer. It was not a resolution, it was more like two people agreeing to stay on the phone and be uncomfortable together, which is, maybe a different kind of progress. He asked if I'd stop the payments permanently. I said that was already done. He said he'd figure out the loans. I said I knew he would. I said congratulations on the wedding genuinely, and I meant it. I told him the envelope still existed. The letter, the payment records, all of it. I told him I hadn't sent it anywhere, hadn't shown it to anyone, and I didn't intend to. What he did with that information was up to him. He said, "Can I come see you? The 4-page and I leave for the honeymoon. I'd like to. I think I need to see you in person." I said, "You don't owe me a visit." He said, "I know I don't owe it. I want to come." I thought about that for a second. I said, "Okay." He flew to Portland 2 weeks after the wedding. Paige came with him. They extended the start of their honeymoon trip through the Pacific Northwest, which honestly worked out logistically. They stayed in a hotel downtown. I met them for dinner at a Thai place near my apartment. The kind of place with paper menus and excellent curry, and we sat for 3 hours. Derek brought a copy of his loan statement. He slid it across the table without saying anything. He'd already called the servicer and set up a new payment plan. He had also, he told me quietly while Paige was in the restroom, applied for a balance transfer to consolidate at a lower rate. He was on top of it. I said, "I know you are. You always figured things out." He said, "I didn't know you were watching." I said, "I was always watching. I just wasn't sure you knew I existed." He looked like I'd said something that hurt him. Good. Not mean good. True good. The kind of thing that needs to hurt a little before it heals right. Paige came back. We ordered more food. Derek told a story about something ridiculous that happened at their wedding reception. A groomsman who had tried to do a backflip and misjudged the ceiling height. And we laughed until my eyes watered. It was the most normal family dinner I had ever had with my brother. On the way home, I walked the long way through a neighborhood I didn't usually cut through. It was a warm July night, and people were sitting on stoops and music was coming out of an open window somewhere. I had the envelope in my bag still. I brought it to dinner in case it felt right to give it to him. It hadn't felt right or necessary. He already knew what was in it. When I got home, I put it in the recycling bin. Not the shredder. The recycling bin. I thought about that, and then I fished it out and actually did shred it. Because I'm an accountant and leaving documented financial records in a recycling bin is the kind of thing that haunts you. But you know what I mean. Here's what I want to say. To anyone watching this who has ever quietly held a family together from a distance, without anyone knowing your hands were the ones doing it, stop waiting for the reveal to fix the relationship. The reveal is just information. It doesn't automatically create the thing you actually wanted, which is for someone to choose you. Give people the chance to choose you before there's a transaction attached. I didn't do that, and I spent 4 years and $42,000 learning the hard way that I had to. Derek and I text now. Actual conversations, not just holiday check-ins. He sent me a photo of the dog last week in a little Halloween costume, and I sent back a voice memo, laughing for about 30 seconds. It's not a perfect relationship. Our mother still says things that make me want to walk out of the room. Our family still has the gaps in it that families have when people spend years not actually talking to each other. But he came to Portland. He slid that statement across the table. He brought his wife and they laughed at the ceiling story, and we ordered too much food, and I walked home on a warm night in July and I thought, okay, this is what it is. And this time I meant it differently. I've thought a lot about why I didn't just tell Derek from the beginning. I've turned it over probably 100 times in the years since. The way you turn a stone in your hand looking for the thing that makes it different from all the other stones. And I think the honest answer is that I was afraid. Not of being rejected outright. I could have survived that. I was afraid of being accepted for the wrong reasons, of having Derek call me every month with updates on the balance, of my mother using it as a talking point at Christmas, of the money becoming the whole story and me disappearing inside it. So I kept it quiet. And in keeping it quiet, I created exactly the gap I was trying to avoid. That's the part that took me a long time to sit with. The thing I thought was protecting me was also the thing that made it impossible for anyone to actually see me. You cannot hold yourself back from people and then be surprised that they don't reach for you. That's not how it works. I learned that the slow way, over 4 years and $42,000, standing outside a rehearsal dinner in a green dress I bought for the occasion. What I know now is that actions don't speak for themselves. That's a lie we tell ourselves, because speaking feels vulnerable and actions feel safe. But silence is not the same as strength. Carrying something alone for years and waiting for someone to notice is not noble, it's just lonely. And loneliness that you choose is still loneliness. The cost was clear enough, I gave without asking to be seen. And so I wasn't seen. The effect was just as clear. I stood outside that restaurant and felt invisible in a way that had nothing to do with Derek, and everything to do with choices I had made years before. That's not blame. That's just how it flows. The things we don't say have consequences just as real as the things we do. What changed things was not the reveal. I want to be careful about that. What changed things was Derek getting on a plane, not because he felt obligated or because I had leverage, but because when he finally understood what had happened, the full picture, not just the numbers, he chose to show up. That was him. That was his character. And I think if I had kept the payments going and never canceled them, never created the situation where the truth had to surface, I would never have found out what his character actually was. There's something to that. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is stop carrying what was never yours to carry alone, and see who steps into the space you leave behind. I'm not the same person who sat on that treadmill in my childhood bedroom staring at an envelope. I'm still an accountant. I still reconcile things for a living. But I've gotten a lot better at reconciling them out loud, with the people involved, instead of in my own head at midnight. Laurel figured it out the hard way. I hope you get to figure yours out easier.